Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome back to the Healing Catalyst podcast. I'm Dr. Avanti Kumar Singh, and I am so glad that you're back with me again this week. So if you've ever pushed yourself to the edge, running on caffeine, ignoring the whispers from your body, or equating your worth with your work, and you're not alone here, then this episode is for you. As an Ayurvedic practitioner and a physician, I see this every day in my patients. I see how everyday things like poor sleep, dehydration, disconnection, and chronic stress slowly chip away at our health until our bodies just say no more, right? They stop us in our tracks. And so today in this episode, we're going to redefine ambition so that we can be ambitious and still reach our goals without sacrificing our health. And yes, this really is possible. My guest today is Amina AlTai. Amina is an executive coach, leadership trainer, proud immigrant, and chronic illness advocate. She works at the intersection of wellness and well-being and ambition, guiding high-performing founders, creatives, and executives towards lives of greater meaningful impact and sustainable success. She's the author of the book, The Ambition Trap: How to Stop Chasing and Start Living, and also a coach to leaders at companies like Google, Meta, Roku, Snap, Outdoor Voices, NYU, and Huge. In our conversation, Amina and I talk about how to recognize the core wounds that drive burnout, like perfectionism, martyrdom, and control, and the practical tools we can use to address these wounds and regulate our nervous systems so that we don't literally die working. We also talk about how to identify our zones of genius and align ambition with purpose instead of pain, and how your dosha, your Ayurvedic mind-body constitution, can really help you understand these patterns of overwork, burnout, and imbalance. By the end of this episode, you'll understand how to shift from painful ambition that's driven by wounds and worthiness traps to purposeful ambition that's rooted in wholeness, confidence, and true well-being. And if you're curious about what your Ayurvedic dosha is, head over to myarvasi.com and you can take a free assessment there. In Ayurveda, your dosha, which is your mind-body type, it's unique to you. It can really help you understand why you push so hard, why you give so much, and why you burn out so easily. It'll give you insight into your patterns so that you can really begin to find a way to live more sustainably, work better, and feel well. All right, let's dive into the episode. Hi, Amina. I am so excited to be here with you finally today to do this podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a joy to sit with you, and I'm just extra delighted to be here today.
I'm so excited to talk to you because I have been talking to you about your book since it came out earlier this year. I was at your book launch here in Chicago, and I've had a chance to read it. And I'm just really excited to dive into everything that you've written about because I found it really inspiring. And I feel like right now people really are really so overloaded with trying to sort of just make it through the world in general, but then wanting to feel productive, wanting to feel successful in whatever they're doing because we're all looking for meaning in some way, right? Especially when the world around us is so difficult to control. We want to control what we're doing. So I think that this is a really important conversation to have, especially for women. So I'm excited to dive in. And so, I was so struck by your story in the beginning of the book when you talk about really being just a few days away from organ failure, having a chronic illness, and you were still working, right?
Yeah.
And so I really kind of want to dig into that. What were some of the beliefs that you had that kept you striving, even though you knew that your body was breaking down? I mean, you're close to organ failure.
Yeah.
What keeps you going in that moment?
So it's really interesting. I tell the story often about the moment that I get the call from my doctor, but what I don't often tell people, so my doctor told me, like, go to the hospital, don't go to work.
Right.
But the second half of the story is that I went to work. I didn't go to the hospital. And it took the whole day of like that news really landing in my body for me to be like, maybe I should go to the hospital. But I think that there were a couple of things at play. First of all, it was the seventh doctor that I'd been to, and I think I felt pretty gaslit. to the point that I was like, maybe these symptoms aren't real. Like maybe it is in my
Mhm.
head. Right. So I think that there was that piece,
Right.
but I also come from a lineage that just was told, like, you just tough it out. Right. And
Right.
when I actually looked at the stories and I looked at the lineage, on my mom's side, there were people that literally like did backbreaking work and died as a result of their like illness or injury from their work. Like my mom's side of the family were coal miners. And
Mhm.
so a lot of them died from like lung cancer or cancers from the mine, that kind of thing. And I was like, oh my
Right.
gosh, there's literally a story here that
Right.
you work yourself to death. And
Mm.
that was such an illuminating moment for me to see that I was
Right.
living that.
So that was one of the beliefs, that you work yourself to death, would you
Totally.
say? Yeah.
Totally. And then also it's like, like, I don't think I believed my own symptoms. Like, is this real? Like, is this like a bid for attention? Like there was
Mhm.
a big part of me that didn't even believe it.
Right. So it's almost like you didn't actually believe yourself, right? And what
Yeah.
you were feeling either.
And then of course I couldn't believe the smaller whispers, right? If I didn't believe the big shout, how
Mhm.
could I believe the smaller whispers?
Right, right. I mean, that's something that I talk about so much in my work, is that, these symptoms are not symptoms. They are symptoms, but they're really signals, right? That your body's trying to tell you something. And so many of us will just ignore it. And it's not because we're just, trying to be a hero or a shero and like, just work through the pain. It's actually these core beliefs, right? That
Mhm.
are underneath that. And
Yeah.
so I'm really curious, this idea of working yourself to death.
Mhm.
But then is that really worth it for success if you're going to die? Like,
Right. It
right?
doesn't make any sense when you bring it to the conscious, rational level. It doesn't
Right.
make any sense.
Right, right. And so, you've worked with so many people. What would you say are some of these core beliefs that are sort of underneath this ambition or this success that keeps people, just wanting more and just pushing harder, even though their body's giving them the signals?
Yeah. I think so many of us, the root of it is we don't feel inherently worthy, right? And we don't feel
Mm.
worthy or lovable. And so we think that if we prove our worthiness through our work, that makes us inherently more valuable or more lovable. So many of the women that I work with, a lot of them are women of color. A lot of them have chronic illness. It's sort of, they fall into the category of historically excluded.
Right.
And I think for so many of us, because of what we've experienced systemically, and then we internalize a lot of that, we think like, I have to work twice as hard to be seen as valuable. And so we double down on those efforts and we believe them ourselves, but then we're the ones that end up taking a hit for it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's almost like it's not only part of our lineage, as you pointed out with your story, but it's also what it's a learned behavior of the environment that we are living in, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like it's coming from every direction.
Yeah. I have this one client and she's magnificent and also, grew up it's sort of in a very similar lineage to mine and just didn't feel like she was inherently valuable, felt like she had to demonstrate her worth through her work.
Mm-hmm.
And she would always be like the first one in, the last one out, right? Because
Right.
somebody early in her career was like, hey, you're not the smartest person in the room, but you're the hardest working person in the
Right.
room. So double down on that.
Oh,
Right. And
wow.
like, I mean, that's not even true, right? She's an exceptionally bright human, but somebody else through their bias and their lens was like, hey, you're not the smartest, so you need to just be the hardest working person here. And she lived by that until we looked at it and it's not the truth, right? So why are we measuring our success or our worthiness or our productivity against somebody else's definition or story?
Right, right. And so it's just coming at the cost of our health, our
Mhm.
physical health, our emotional health. We know that chronic stress can deregulate the HPA axis, right? And that is controlling our release of cortisol. So really what
Mhm.
happens is this chronic stress will cause the continuous release of cortisol to the point where at some point we are not as sensitive to the cortisol and the cortisol doesn't really help us. And so we go from this hyperactive state, which I think is what helps push us in the beginning, right? That stress response, you go into overdrive. It's, you're like really focused, you get everything done. But then if that's the way you are for years upon years upon years, right? It leads to burnout
Mhm.
because at some point the cortisol, you're not responding to the cortisol anymore, right? So
Right.
it's physiological too. So it's so interesting how, you know, our mind is so connected to our body and our physiology, right? So these core beliefs, these deep beliefs that we hold can actually change our physiology.
100%.
Right?
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but I would really love to dive into that. So, if somebody is feeling like they might have sort of this misaligned ambition, let's say, right? Where their beliefs and their brain is telling them to do something, but their body's telling them to do something else, right? And we often don't realize until it's too late. What are some of the early signs that you have really heard women tell you about that, retrospectively, they're like, oh my gosh, I should have known from these signs, these physical, emotional, mental signs, because I think that so many women, so many people don't know what those signs are until it's too late, right?
Yeah.
So what are some of those signs that you've found with people that you've worked with?
On the physical side of things, there's a lot of fatigue. There's a lot of GI issues, back issues. Those are kind of the classics.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the emotional side of things, I see a lot of people starting to feel extreme negativism and cynicism toward their work, right? Something that they used to love and care deeply about, they just feel really distant from.
Mm-hmm.
And even to the point where, coworkers that they used to love or clients that they used to love or other constituents that are part of their core community, they just feel really distant from and they have sort of less patience for.
Uh-huh.
Even noticing things like having trouble getting started at the beginning of their day, right? They used to kind of just dive right in and have no problem. And now it just takes that extra oomph of caffeine or effort to be able to jumpstart their energy for the day. But a lot of the times it is really those emotional pieces that those are the ones that they'll listen to more so than the physical symptoms, right? When they can no longer tolerate the work, when they can no longer tolerate the space that they're in, then they're like, okay, now I'll make a change. And then they happen to also look at the physical symptoms at the same time.
Right. And so what would you say are maybe like 3 signals that you always hear people talk about that show you that your ambition might be hurting you? It's not productive anymore. It's gone to that place of really unhealthy and not good for you. What are some things that maybe people who are listening could just be looking out for if they're like, oh my gosh, I have all 3 of those things. Maybe I need to sit down and think about this.
Yeah. Can I give you more than 3?
Oh, you can give me as many as you want.
So in the book, I talk about so ambition is neutral and natural. I define it as a desire for more life, right? A wish to unfold or grow, which is inherent in every living thing on the planet.
Sure.
But there's 2 orientations of it. There's painful ambition driven by the core wounds. And then there's purposeful ambition that's connected to our deeper truth, our bigger why. So the core wounds, right? What are they? Rejection, abandonment, humiliation, betrayal, and injustice. And we each have 1, 2, 3, or all 5 of these wounds. It's just a very human rite of passage.
Right.
And then as a result of the wounds, we wear a corresponding mask. The masks show up a lot in my clients' lives. So if you had an abandonment wound, the mask you wear is dependence. If you had a rejection wound, the mask you wear is avoidance or withdrawal, like you're withdrawing from things or you're avoiding throwing your hat in. If you have a humiliation wound, which is where you feel like your caregivers were embarrassed of you, you wear a masochism or martyrdom mask. This is a big one for my clients. So we'll come back to this. The next one is betrayal. If we felt like our caregivers didn't live up to expectations, the mask we wear is control. Another big one for my clients.
Yeah.
And then the last one is injustice. So if we felt like our individuality in childhood was restrained, the mask we wear is rigidity, aka perfectionism. So those last 3 show up for my clients in really big ways. So sort of the more burned out we are, the more we're indexing usually into those masks, right? We feel like everything's out of control. We'll double down on the control. We have this inability to live in an imperfect world. So we need more of that perfection. We're taking on more of the burden because we feel like other people are just going to let us down. We tend to over-index on those masks. And so that's a really great place for people to start, is just noticing our wounds and the masks that we're wearing. And can we start to bit by bit give up those masks?
Okay. So you literally have described me. I'm just sitting here. I'm like, oh my gosh, is this a therapy session? Those are, I identify with every single one of those, the last 3. Exactly.
Those are my 3 too.
Yeah. As soon as, and it might be, and we'll talk about Ayurveda too, because this is like very pitta. It's very fire, but so that's so interesting. So it's really wounds and masks. And it's really probably tuning into the masks because that's what you are doing, right? That's the behavior that you're exhibiting.
It's interesting. I find that it's about a 50-50 split. Some people really know their wounds. They're like I have a rejection wound. I'm very aware of it. So I really know that one, but some people find their way in through the mask where they're like, you know what? I do have that perfectionism tendency. I do have that need for control, or I can martyr myself. And so I find it's kind of split how people find their way in.
Right. And so what are you supposed to do with that? So you have that information. Now what? Now what do you do?
I believe, as a coach, and what I've seen is awareness is 80% of it, right? Because as soon as you become aware, then you're able to shift. I've told this story a few times now, but my younger sister is a psychotherapist. And 10 years ago, I was helping her move at the time. And she was like, can I put all of my boxes in your apartment? And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And it was 40, 50 boxes, like a one bedroom apartment. And I lived in a one bedroom, and she's trying to put all the boxes from her one bedroom in my one bedroom. And I had a meltdown, and she was like, love you, girl, but you're controlling. And I was like, huh, I am. Until that point, I had no idea that I was controlling. And that was a bit of an extreme ask, right? But I think it also brought out my extreme control side.
Sure.
And then I just started to notice it everywhere. I was like, oh my gosh, she is right. I try to control everything, and I had no idea. So just moment to moment, the practice of, I see in this moment, my nervous system feels like it can't find resonance, right? There's dysregulation happening. I feel unsafe.
Right.
And what I want to lean on is control, because that's my lifeboat. That's how I get to safety. What could it look like in this moment if I found safety another way? And so just using these moment to moment practices, and over time, thanks to neuroplasticity, that can become our new way of being. And we don't have to lean into the old way of control if that's the mask that we're using.
Right. So it's really the awareness, right? It always goes back to awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, how can we invite ourselves into choosing again, and some support tools that allow us to feel safe in those moments that we don't.
So, I want to turn to something you probably don't get, maybe you do get asked this question a lot, but what is one goal, ambitious goal that you had to let go of that really actually helped you heal? Because I think so many of us, like you have said, have these ambitions, these needs for success, that are rooted in proving ourselves, right? I know that I have that, right? I definitely have that of wanting to prove to the world that I am X, Y, and Z from core wounds, right? So what is an ambition that you kind of had to walk away from to allow yourself to sort of move forward in this healthy way?
I love this question, and nobody asks me this question, so it's fantastic. I think one of the biggest goals that I've had to walk away from is the idea of growing my business to a certain size. And I'm curious if you felt this way, in the entrepreneur space, right? It's first you get to 6 figures, then you get to 7 figures, then you get to 8 figures. Then they're like, let's go to 9 figures.
Right.
And it's just never ending.
Yeah.
And, I really struggled to get my business to a certain point, right? I remember being part of this 7 figures founders group and just feeling like such a fraud in that room. I was like, I'm hanging by a thread. You all are amazing. Just really kind of struggling to get there and stay there and all the things. But I actually realized that that was not my work, right? It's sure, there are things that we have agency over and things that we can impact, right? But what I really realized is that actually the most important part of owning a business for me is that it helps us find and heal and integrate our shadows. I was like, whether I get to 8 figures or not, whatever it is, it doesn't even matter, right? That's actually not the point. The point for me was to be, deeply in service. The point of me was to be really sort of dedicated to divine purpose and to learn and come here for my soul's growth. If I hit those numbers by virtue of that, that's an awesome cherry on top, but that's not the come from. And when I shift the orientation, so the come from was I need to get to this revenue milestone. It was such frenetic energy. It was really chaos, right? And then when I came back to the intention and the why, just everything flowed so differently. And so I'm always inviting myself back to that intention and the why, but I really had to let go of these sort of number goals that so much of the community that I'm surrounded by defines their success by.
Yeah. And I mean, thank you for sharing that because I know that's very personal, but I think that that's so many of us, right? We live in this Western culture where, the measures are productivity, how much output you have. So output in the form of, your creativity, the books you've written, the articles you've written, the interviews you've done, the money you've made, right? The promotions you've gotten, everything is this external measure. And
Mm-hmm.
so again, we're a product of the environment that we live in. And so we start to measure ourselves by that, right? I think what you're speaking about is sort of this measurement of instead of, am I fulfilling my purpose? And that's an internal measurement because
Yeah.
no one else can tell you what your purpose is, right?
Yeah, 100%. So in the book, I talk about contentment. And it's so funny because, as I talk to more people about ambition, they're like, I'm sorry, in a conversation about ambition, we're talking about contentment. Like, how do those pieces sit side by side? And I'm like,
Right.
well, for purposeful ambition, which is what I want to talk about, they need to. And so there was a researcher from Eastern Bhutan, and contentment translates into English as either the knowledge of enough or unconditional wholeness. And I love that so much, right? Because it's internal, right? This internal measure of enough, right? This idea
Right.
that regardless of what's happening outside of ourselves, we're unconditionally whole. And
Right.
I think, particularly in the West, we're not taught to think that way. It's so counterintuitive to how we're
Mm-hmm.
taught to think, but it cultivates so much more peace,
Yeah.
right? I'm not looking for the next dopamine hit,
Right.
the next, revenue milestone, book milestone. It's like, I know those things are nice, right? And I want to get my work into the hands of people, as do you.
Yeah.
But whether I do or don't, I have the knowledge of enough.
Right, right. And so, I mean, it's not only good for your peace, as you said, having purpose, but it's also really good for your health, right? I mean, we know there are so many studies that show that if you have a sense of purpose, and they've done a lot of studies actually in centenarians, right? I mean, the blue
Mm.
zones, but this applies to all of us, right? And there's studies that are on younger people too, is that when you have a sense of purpose, you have a lower mortality. And that is from every disease. I mean, we know specifically for cardiovascular disease, for your blood pressure. I mean, even for mood disorders, right? A sense of purpose, sense of connection to your purpose and to others, really is good for your health. It's not just for your peace, right? And I know how did you see that sort of manifest for you going from being on the brink of organ failure. And again, I know that there's probably many years and many things that went in between, going from there to there. But how did you see that sort of manifest for you of, going from this place where you were so unhealthy?
Mm-hmm.
How did it show up in your health? Like letting go of that goal?
Yeah. It's really, really interesting because for me, it was almost like a bit of a light switch moment where I fully understood the cost of working in the old way that I was working. And
Mm-hmm.
I just had this moment where I was like, we spend more of our heartbeats at work than we do anywhere else. Like, if it is not purposeful, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? Like, it was just so clear to me. And I was like, oh, I want to help other people do this and really unearth their purpose because we spend so much time here. It has to feel aligned, right? We all have different relationships with work and things like that, but
Mm-hmm.
I can't be the person that clocks in, clocks out. It has to be meaningful for me.
Right.
But what's really interesting is like, it's actually shown up in my blood work, and particularly in the last 3 years as I've immersed myself more into nervous system work. So,
Mm-hmm.
I have a family history of cardiovascular disease, right? I've had high cholesterol since I was 25. And when I tell you that I have been meditating and
Mm-hmm.
moving and eating the most beautifully, right?
Right.
I'm not exaggerating, but it was just sort of genetic. They'd just be like, well, sorry, best of luck, right?
Mm-hmm.
But mine was 8 times higher than it needed to be. And it dropped 2,000 points in the last year, to the point that my doctor was like, what did you do? And I was like, I kid you not, have done nothing differently except for more nervous system work. And so I think that a lot of these practices that we think are extra or too simple actually can move the needle in the biggest ways, right? Even just for me, one of the things that I notice makes the biggest difference, I live right next to a park. If I'm feeling really out of my body, I'm like, okay, just go spend 10 minutes in the park. Notice the leaves, feel the breeze, look at the clouds.
Yep.
And it's just like a switch. And it's extra cool that it gets to show up in the blood work too.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that story. I mean, again, these are the simple things that actually are so powerful, but people will assume because it's quote simple that it's easy and it's, oh, how's that going to work? Right. Because we're all so, again, programmed to think that everything worth doing has to be difficult. And that's just not true.
It's not.
It's not true.
It's actually really cool to just like sit in this with you for a second, because I think about all the years where I was like so obsessive about like eating correctly and moving correctly. Right. And then the thing that actually moved the needle for me was really the simplest.
Right. It's amazing. I always say this, like, I'll have people who will come up to me after every talk I do and they'll say, Dr. Kumar Singh, I have changed my diet. I'm eating X, Y, and Z. I eliminated all this stuff. I still don't feel well. Yeah. And I'm like, let's look at what's going on beyond the food, right? Yeah. What's going on in your relationships? What's going on in the, spaces that you work, live, and play in? What's going on with your sense of purpose, your career, right? All of these things. And the light bulbs start to go off and they're like, oh my gosh, I never even thought about that. So it's exactly what you're saying. They're so focused on the food. And again, no shade to that because that is really important, but it's not the whole story.
It's not. I was thinking about this today and I hadn't thought about this in a very long time, and it must have been subconsciously because our interview was coming up. But the doctor that diagnosed me was a Western practitioner, but she was also an Ayurvedic practitioner. And ironically, right? Yeah. And then it was really interesting because, she gave me a whole protocol and she was like, you need to work with a hematologist and like all these things. But you know what she also did? She sent me to therapy. And I remember being like, what? And I was like, okay, but I'm a good student. So I went, But I think it was exactly the right thing, right? I think I needed to go to therapy. And I kind of think of that and chuckle sometimes. I'm like, she knew.